So here are the two halves of the top plate, fresh out of the mould. I'm very happy with how it's come back together. The glue is a little tacky still, but this is perfect for the cleaning process, which I'll get on with starting now. So I'll start cleaning the excess glue off the top plate here using a horsehair brush and a little bit of water, just plain tap water, just coming at it from a few different angles. You really don't want to get too much water on this area. You don't want the water to penetrate into the glued crack area and open the crack up at all. So I'm trying to work it fairly quickly, coming at a few different angles just to wash off the excess glue. These brushes I make up myself using excess horsehair cut-offs from rehairs, and then just wiping off the glue and sort of water residue mix left from the cleaning with a soft cotton cloth. I've just torn this one out of an old sheet that I go through and use regularly for most of my cleaning processes. I prefer to use cotton for it's good and absorbent, and just checking the feeling along the surface of the crack as I go. It is still quite obvious here. You can see the bright white line of the crack. This is partly due to my having cleaned it out really nicely before it went back together. So cleaned out all the old glue and dirt out of it, and that means when it goes back together again, it leaves just a clean, bright white line of the fresh spruce, and is a good basis to start the retouch from. I'm also just checking that the 2 points where the purfling meet have met and joined perfectly, which they had in this case. And next steps will be to remove these gently and fit some cleats on the inside. It is going to be difficult to fit the cleats because you can see the tool marks where the top's been, I think, been thinned. I do wonder whether it's had a base bar fitted. So it's interesting that there's these base bar marks, pencil lines from where the base bar's been fit. And I actually don't think they would have been done in factory like that. I think someone's replaced the base bar in it and thinned the top. So that's an interesting point to note. I might get the caliper and just check the thicknesses maybe even once we've got these off. We'll run over it with a caliper and check the thicknesses. That'll be an interesting thing to do. Just with a hot knife now, I'll start taking these little blocks off. Be a little bit careful. I don't want to get too much hot water into the crack that we've just glued up. Just as effective, just to give them a little tap. The glue as you've seen when I've taken neck video, a sharp tap is often enough to dislodge the glue. Any that are a bit stubborn, I'll work off with a little warm water.
Okay, that gets most of those little clamps off. There's a few here that are a little more sticky. Okay, that takes those little clamps off. We can now start preparing this to fit some wooden cleats. So we'll fit wooden cleats all the way down. It will be a little tricky fitting it around some of the grooves of this, the way this has been thinned out. So I might actually need to check it with the thicknessing gauge, which I'll get, and then we'll maybe smooth out some of this area just at least with a scraper and maybe a little sandpaper. So here's my thicknessing gauge. By moving the pin up and down, it tells me how many fractions of a millimetre. So that's 1 millimetre. 1 is 1 millimetre, 2 is 2 millimetres, the distance that this is apart. So for instance, we can get a business card and pop that in between, and that will tell us just, what's that, 0.12, 0.3 of a millimetre. The business card is 0.3 of a millimetre thick. Or we can get a scrap piece of wood and 1.5 all the way up to 3 mil. So using that tool, we can go through different areas of the belly or back plate of an instrument and get the thicknesses at various different points. And the reason we want to do that is that there are different tonal nodes around the instrument that you want to be able to tap and get different tones out of. You can also just go roughly from measurement. I often just refer to old instruments to get a gauge for when the top plates and the back plates start to get too thin and what sort of a range of thicknesses that you should be looking for. And if we're looking at the measurements on this plate, every plate is obviously going to be different, but if we're looking at the measurements on this plate, we're still looking at 4.4 in the middle. The outside of the wings here are 3, so they're quite thin, although that one's getting up to 3.7, 3, but there's a nice amount of timber still in the middle. Now, what I didn't want to see was it getting really thin. So it is really dangerous if you thin these plates too much, you'll get a bright sound, but it won't sustain and the top of the plates can collapse. So it's important to not take too much timber out of them. I don't believe that's been done with this. Unfortunate that it hasn't been finished nicely. However, I'm also confident that there is just enough material for me to be able to go back over and refinish some of this area so I can fit some cleats to it more easily. So just back with my trusty card scraper. Clamp the plate down. feel of this, it might actually need a bit of a sharpen up. I'm not wanting to take too much material off here, but just starts to even out some of, you can hopefully see the grooves in this side. Just starts to even some of those out. Mainly just working on the area where the crack is, because that's where I want to fit my my cleats. This side is really ridgy. It's a little tricky working around the base bar here. It means I can't really get the full sort of flat width of the scraper onto it. Just a little tricky in spots, but not to worry about the width. I won't even be removing sort of 0.1 of a mil from this, really just taking off the high points that have been left behind by the previous person that's done the work on it. You can see here there's a lot of this, really it wasn't refinished very well when they went through and retuned the plates at some point and did a base bar on it. This instrument also has a second label. This instrument has a second label in it. There's one being put over the top of the one at the back. So the one underneath is a different Amati label, and the one on the top is a Nicholas Amati. So I would say at the same time that someone has put a different label in, that they re-graduated it to dimensions and measurements of a Nicholas Amati. So getting happy with that now. I can look to start fitting some cleats to the inside of that. So we have here a piece of quarter sawn spruce. The top plate is made of spruce. The timber is less likely to warp if it's cut quarter sawn, whereas if it's cut this way, then it can cup along the width of those granular grain lines. So the top plate is cut on the quarter. You can see maybe more easily on the top here. In the top of most instruments, you can see the grain lines running up and down. That's a sign that it's quarter sawn. You can also see at the end here, if you look at the end of the plates of your instrument, you should see the grain lines coming down through at right angles to the top surface. So that indicates it's quarter sawn. So what we want to do is we want to cut our little cleats that are going to support this crack. They need to be cut on the quarter, and they need to be fit with the longitudinal grain lines at right angles to the direction of the grain at the top. And that's because it's less likely to split across them. So by putting the grain lines across the crack, and this might be very simple for some of you may already know this information and that, but I'll just explain it, so everyone understands as best I can. You can see the grain lines at the top are running this way, so if it wants to split, it's going to want to split in line with the grain, as it has done previously. And by putting little blocks of wood, basically with their grain lines aligned at right angles to that, then they provide support and strength, and just they can be cut down very thin and not affect the tuning of the plate, but also by giving it the most strength possible. So that's how I'm going to cut this spruce, which I've used. Used it for all sorts of things. It's a bigger piece. So these are going to be cut in little towers this way. So I want them roughly, whatever that is, it's about 1 centimetre, which is almost spot on 1 centimetre. And I will generally split them out if I can. So now we'll cut these two down in half this way. And this will give us, you'll see how it comes together in a moment. This will give us 4 little stacks. Will then be fit, so I'll fit one and then we'll chop it off and we'll fit the next one, we'll chop it off, we'll fit the next one. No, we just go along and fit them. You'll see that in a moment. So I'll just cut these off and then we'll get to the fitting process. So here we have our little stack. The grain is running this way and it's cut on the quarter. So we just line this up and I'm just roughly penciling off where each one is going to go. So we'll have one there. It's a bit tricky to pick up exactly where the crack is now that I've cleaned that up. And then we'll put one in the middle, I think, of those two. So that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cleats down here. And then we'll do the same process here and we'll just mark off one at each end. Going roughly 1.5 centimetres, I think, apart. Might actually move these a little bit farther apart so that we've got that marks out. We'll have 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 cleats there, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side. So I'll have 11 cleats overall. So we're back here to show you the fitting process of the cleats. So this is the little blocks that I've cut. We're fitting 11 cleats on this. I'll quickly run you through the process on 1 or maybe 2 and then I'll just get to work and do the rest. So I fit them very similarly to the way I fit bridge feet. This is a piece of, I think 120, might be 150. Actually, no, it's 240 grit sandpaper. So it's quite fine and fairly thin. I'll just line the cleat block up with the pencil marks that I've made with where I'd like to fit them. Slide the sandpaper in underneath, and then while holding the sandpaper firm, just very gently rub that block backwards and forwards. Basically, just a little awkward here for the camera, but just like so. Now, if you don't hold it firmly and you rock it side to side or this way, you won't get a very good fit. So you just want to do that basically until it starts to fit. I've only done a few little sandpaper scrapes on that. I'll just continue that until it's getting good sandpaper coverage. The other thing to note and mention on these is, which I'll do just now, I generally put a little arrow on the side of the block that's facing the top of the instrument. So this is the neck block up here with a neck cut out. So I will always face them towards the neck. And that way I know If I go to fit it this way, that's wrong because the V-cut's facing the bottom of the instrument. This takes a lot of patience and a fair bit of experience, I guess, and practice to be able to get things to fit quickly. I mean, the more times you take it away and put it back on, the more chance you have of putting it back on in a slightly different place, or, you know, rubbing it slightly differently. So judging how long to go for before stopping and making sure you're not rocking in the wrong directions and that sort of thing. It takes quite a firm grip, and you want to also make sure you're moving it back and forwards parallel, not sort of side to side this way or that way. It needs to be straight parallel, so all those sorts of things. It's about learning to get your body in the right position, your arm in the right position, your elbow tucked in close to your body, so that you're moving your arm in short parallel movements backwards and forwards, and all those sorts of things. They take time and skill to learn and develop as you're learning your trade. They're all the sorts of things that I hope when I demonstrate these sorts of things that maybe they look easy or simple, but there's a lot going on in sort of the background that I might not always even be aware of to tell you that is going on, and is sort of all behind the scenes stuff that makes the job faster and easier, and is all down to years of experience. So that's now starting to fit. You can see, I'm not sure, well, I might have just got my hair in the way there. There's a slight rock to it still, and that's just because of the rocking motion of the sandpaper. So in order to get that rocking motion out, I will jump to the same process that I use for bridge feet, using a piece of carbon paper, and I'll tuck it underneath, and I'll just bounce it. So I've got my pointer and index finger, and I'll basically just bounce the little block between my two fingers, between these two fingers on my left hand here, and that just gives me a starting and stopping reference point. And when we look at the marks, you can see we've got the carbon touching here and here in the middle, and a little bit here on one end, but not at the back, and that's that rock backwards and forwards that I was talking about. So what I'll then do is just go and scratch off with a scalpel, and this is where I use a scalpel and not my nice knife, because it blunts the blade quite quickly. So with a disposable blade, it's makes sense to sort of use it for that. You can see there it starts to touch a lot more now, and I'll keep doing that until it touches the whole thing. Often right before it fits at the very end, you'll find that it will go from almost fitting everywhere to you'll have just one or 2 points touching, and it'll look like you've gone backwards a long way, and you're barely touching anywhere. But all that you've done is, all that really means is that you've got 2 high spots left, say, and once you take those high spots down, then the whole thing covers. So if it looks like it goes from starting to fit, looking like it's fitting really well, to then absolutely nothing, or only 2 little touching spots, don't be disheartened. It actually means you're getting very close. You also want to make sure that you're consistent, and we're consistently touching in the same spots, and it's just slowly spreading more to areas where it hasn't been touching. Some people also use chalk to do this. They'll rub chalk. I'll quickly show you here. Using a piece of chalk, just rub chalk on the top of the instrument. It's the other thing you can see here, and then pop the block in place on the chalk. I'll try and do it left-handed so that we can see what I'm doing. Rub that backwards and forwards. And then might just be able to see, it's a little harder to see where the chalk sits. I also find the chalk is a thicker medium, and therefore for chalk that looks like it's fitting everywhere except here, this little gap. And that's actually one of those ridges from the thinning process that was done previously. So looking at a chalk, for instance, that looks like it's fitting absolutely perfectly everywhere. Now if I knock that chalk dust off without taking off much of the timber, and if we just dust off the top plate here so we don't have much chalk left, and go with our carbon paper, you can see we do have quite a reasonably good coverage all over most of it, but there are still gaps there where the chalk was saying there wasn't. So that tends to tell me that the carbon paper is actually a more accurate method of doing it than the chalk. This is pretty close to fitting this one. The gaps that you see there, they're in line with the grain. So we can see there we've got pretty good coverage, and what I mean by that is all sort of four corners are covering, most of the middle is now filling in, and these sorts of little areas here, they will just swell with the glue. So I'm fairly happy with the fit of this. I can feel it as well when I'm rubbing it. There's no longer the rock in place. Now I'm just going to take the carbon sort of dust off that so that it doesn't gummy up the glue. And when we put that in place, that's now nice and solid. There's no gaps under it anywhere. So from here, I will split off the bottom face of that little block and write a number 1 on the block. So we have a little number 1 on the block. There's our little V mark to point to the front, and I'll put a number 1 on the top plate where it's going to sit over the top of, and that's our first cleat fitting there. I will now continue on with the remaining 10 over the next few hours and come back to you when they're all done.